Now we want to turn our attention to another critically important issue, and that's the ongoing crackdown by the Trump administration on many cities around the country, so-called law and order crackdown using the National Guard and federal forces of various types, allegedly to combat crime, quote unquote. But I think there's a lot more wrapped inside of that. So to talk more about all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined in the show once again by Lawrence Grandpre, who's the Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Lawrence, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, it's great to have you as always. And, you're based in Baltimore, which, of course, has been in the crosshairs of Mr. Trump rhetorically. And in fact, even again today on the White House social media account about the whole issue of, quote unquote crime in the city of Baltimore. But so far, they have not yet moved as aggressively on the National Guard issue. But they are sending the National Guard into Memphis, it seems into Memphis, and also into New Orleans, it seems into New Orleans, and some of these blue cities and red states. So, I mean, maybe to start, give us a sense of how you think that this is playing out, both A, the calculations of the White House, and B, why it is that sort of some Democrats seem willing to sort of let this happen while others, at least in a rhetorical sense, are pushing back more.
Yeah, so I think the calculation of the White House is they want to make the midterms in 26 a Willie Horton midterms. They know that crime is one of the issues where they're most trusted, I believe, because of the embedded racial scripts people have around cities and around Black people and crime. And to a certain extent, they want to take credit for what is a massive crime decline in these blue cities. So the problem, of course, being these are blue mayors in these blue cities. And you are able to get around that by having a show of force, like what they're doing in Memphis is not the full mobilization. They have about 150 National Guard folks that are around. Largely, the idea is their presence is a visible deterrent for crime. It allows Trump to claim credit for what his crime declines he had very little to do with. We've talked about the grassroots violence prevention work happening, especially in blue cities and blue states, happening around the country, but also in red states. I think that Democrats are in a tough position because they've overlearned the lesson they wanted to learn from 24, which is they got too woke, they went too far left on crime. The people are claiming that they want to go to the center. The reality is that it is the policies that advocates have pushed for that have slowed the rate of the violent attack on Black communities by mass incarceration that helps stabilize communities as well as grassroots violence prevention, which allows for the crime to decline. But of course, Trump wants to be able to create a dynamic where he can take credit for those crime declines. And to conclude, they are in a position where they say no to the National Guard, but they say yes to the ATF, yes to the FBI, yes to the good law enforcement, the legal law enforcement. And to kind of get something I want to hit on, it's kind of like the liberal Zionists versus the conservative hardcore Zionists. The Trump National Guard wing is we need to occupy Gaza, we need to destroy Gaza, it's animals there. While the liberals on crime are very similar to liberal Zionists in terms of like, we need a lawful occupation, we need lawful proportionate use of force policies, the Department of Justice, ATF, not National Guard, but the ideology is still the same. The idea is to legitimate police presence with the liberal Zionists. Similarly, they want to legitimate and affirm constitutional good policing with the liberals on crime.
I think that's such a good point, and I wonder if you think there's this sort of the opposite side of that parallel is around the issue of self-determination, that when we talk about the sort of community-based violence interruption in the same way we talk about Palestinian efforts to govern themselves in humanity, the thing that they really fear is the possibility of, if communities can come together and prevent crime significantly without the police, have they sort of slipped out of the control, even if it's in a small way, of the state, and have they built power in a way that makes it more difficult to impose upon them the policies you would like to?
Absolutely. And to stick with, I think it's a core metaphor given the flotilla and what I know your audience is on their hearts right now. I think that for the cities, the presence of crime delegitimates rule. Similar to how in Gaza, the presence of quote unquote terrorism delegitimates Islamic rule or Hamas rule, right? So the idea is that these people cannot be trusted to govern themselves because look at the results, chaos and violence. I think similarly, in Black cities and Democrat cities, you have the desire to have NGOs and nonprofits take over the infrastructure of violence prevention in these cities because when they're tied to Black governance, it's not trustworthy. It's corruption. It's handing handouts to people who might be corrupt. Very similar to like we can't just give any sort of Palestinian-run institution aid or power. It has to all go through internationally moderated NGOs. So I think it's this thing where people talk about fascism is imperialism coming home. I think if you have a view of Black people in America as essentially an internal colony, it's kind of a bidirectional thing, where the scripts we gain from local news media, again, Sinclair Media, is on their board is Howard Friedman, the former head of AIPAC. And the narratives and scripts they use about violence in cities is very similar to the propaganda techniques they use to attack people in the Middle East. I was looking at a story in Nashville, which has the Sinclair Media station. They said it has a 25% increase in youth charged as adults. Now, that's technically true, but it was from 8 to 10. And that is their 25% increase in crime. It is very, very similar to the sorts of propaganda that they use in the Middle East to say Hamas is recruiting young people. They're recruiting young terrorists in the madrasas. So we have to either bomb the madrasa, the conservative view, or we have to send the NGOs in to take over the madrasa. So again, I think we're seeing a very similar thing with the nonprofit industrial complex here and the NGO complex abroad, all around this concept that we cannot trust these people to govern themselves.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of Sinclair Media and the role it plays, and I want to talk more about that. But of course, and now everyone's talking about Sinclair Media because of what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, and I think most people had no idea maybe who they are. But I think what's been revealed is that, Sinclair and Nexstar, these are very powerful corporations in both their ability to shape media, but the control of the stations, the ability to even shape the networks. And I don't know where my question is, but I was hoping you could just talk more about that, because I feel now the sort of power of these networks is being revealed a little bit more to, I think, many Americans who were unaware.
Yeah, that's a great point. So people heard about when Jimmy Kimmel came back, he wasn't allowed to come back on the so-called affiliates. And there were two affiliates, I think Nexstar and Sinclair, that were like, we don't like what he did. We don't want to bring him back. Now, eventually they did, but that's because Nexstar wants to merge, and also Sinclair wants to do mergers that have to be affirmed by Trump's Federal Communications Commission. But on top of that, David Smith, the executive chairman of Sinclair Media, is the ideological right-wing person. He owns media networks in many blue cities, not just blue cities, but many blue cities. It's not always Fox, but it's oftentimes just a local news network. And in the cities where he owns them, people have noted that his coverage tends to be more sensationalist, doing the sort of statistical tricks that sort of center crime as a concern, largely marketing to the suburbs. So again, people can believe that Gaza is a cesspool of violence because it's very similar to the scripts we have about cities in America when you live in the suburbs. They are pits of decay and violence because you're pumped over and over with Sinclair Media propaganda. He's actually stated that he actually only economically does well with Sinclair during election years because his idea is to cultivate a more conservative, afraid of crime suburban base and have politicians run ads on his stations going to them, right? So on top of all that, Howard Friedman, he's on the board of the whole Sinclair Media, not just our local Fox station. They happen to be based here in Baltimore. But Howard Friedman lives in Baltimore, but just an example, he gets involved in local political campaigns supporting tough on crime Democrats. He's a Democrat, right? So as the former head of AIPAC, he's involved in using the Sinclair Media station here locally to carry talking points from the conservative Democrats and from the chiefs and sheriffs to become their propaganda wing, right? So when he's supporting folks like Dahlia Tarr, who's the senator in Northwest Baltimore, which is like a divided, partially Jewish, partially Black neighborhood, he's using the scripts from Sinclair to attack the Black political representation in that community and make people feel they need a tough on crime Democrat like Dahlia Tarr, right? So these are people who are direct political players in some cases. He gives a lot to UDP, which is like the non-AIPAC that went after Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, but they use the political narratives of propaganda to local news to explicitly make racialized attacks on the Black community that very much mirror what they're doing to the Palestinians in Palestine.
Wow. I mean, there's so many different elements to this. I mean, even just the value of, I think a lot of people who are like also sort of cord cutters in this reality forget how impactful this is. I mean, if for no other reason, it comes on right after sports, but many other things, that there are so many people, parents who are, waking up and looking to see what's going on with schools and all these different factors that I think are sort of critically important. And obviously they know that, and they're putting that together in a way. So, and I think the fact that he's a Democrat kind of blows me away, just to be honest with you. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it's like, this is the network that was putting Boris Afashian on every single station just a couple years ago, who is now, another top Trump advisor. So we're bringing those sort of two things together. And I wonder how you are sort of evaluating this sort of because obviously, you're seeing Wes Moore is not playing the same game as the mayor of Memphis. You know what I mean? The mayor and the governor in Chicago are not doing the same piece there. I mean, they're sort of offering a more kind of rhetorical pushback to Trump in some senses, but also, doing their own pieces, like Maryland doing the state police surge and different things like that. So I wonder how you're evaluating those elements who are pushing back a little harder in Trump in the mainstream, but if it does, it still leaves something to be desired.
It's very much a pushback in terms of affect and style when there are fundamental similarities in substance. Again, Maryland has the highest number of youth charged as adults in the almost in the entire country. So when you see the DC occupation literally using talking points about young people being super predators, young folks breaking curfew, young folks not being able to have real consequences charged as adults, again, because it's extrajudicial, because it's the National Guard and not the local PD, the liberals, including Wes Moore, say that's illegal, that's not effective, that's not sustainable. And maybe they have a point. It really isn't sustainable. When the National Guard came to Baltimore after Freddie Gray in 2015, when they left, we had a massive explosion and shootings and crime. But the idea is that we don't need you to occupy us. We'll occupy ourselves. So we'll have a surge of state troopers basically using the same logic. And it's very important because part of the idea of grassroots violence prevention is that we're going to send credible messengers to give people not just services like jobs and healthcare, but a new vision that if you follow us, you can actually live a life of self-respect and you can actually escape the violence and fear that's plagued you your whole life. And now you're going to community and you're saying, look, I did everything right. I put the gun down, got off the corners, and they still talk about us like we're animals. They're still occupying us, whether it's state troopers or National Guard. So what do we say to those people when the very governor who promotes grassroots violence prevention as a reason why we don't need the National Guard uses the same logic of occupation with the state troopers, right? So it's not just that it's like sort of liberal, proceduralist, fair occupation. It directly challenges the logic of the violence prevention work that's been so effective at bringing the crime down in the cities and has been in the mouths of Democrats as to why we don't need the National Guard. So we really have to go deeper and think through a theory about why crime happens. It's how people interpret their space in the world, where if they're going to treat me like an animal anyway, I might as well crash out and get it while I can. But when you change the vision of possibilities through violence prevention and mentors and trusted guides, guiding them to alternatives, that solves crime better than deterrence through incarceration or occupation. And that's just empirically proven at this point.
No, I think it's a good point, and I think it also speaks to the psychology of Black working class communities because, obviously so many of these people will often point out, well, if you poll people, they say that they really care about crime. But one of the things I always point out to people is when you look at a lot of those polls, the one I think about the most is the Economist YouGov poll, because at least last year they were asking the two questions back to back. They'd say, do you think crime is important? And the percentage of Black people would be, let's say 78% would say it's a big issue. Then the next question would be, do you think civil rights are important? And 78% of Black people would say the same. So it's like, just because people are saying they're concerned about public safety does not mean that they are then endorsing any, particular policy from the point of view of more police, more occupations, so on and so forth. Not that there aren't people who support that, but it does seem like there is a flattening of opinion in Black communities that makes it seem like people don't care about their own human rights if they care about public safety.
Yeah, I think James Foreman's book, James Foreman Jr.'s We're Locking Up Our Own, really, I didn't think it was perfect. But he does say that when we talked about crime, we always meant an all of the above approach. Well, I mean, some of us meant an explicitly not policing approach and then all the other stuff.
Right.
But most Black people mean all of the above. I think part of the challenge for us is to explain to folks there's a point where all of the above, they can't all work together anymore. Like we're getting to the point where hospital-based violence prevention, people are shot and stabbed up in hospitals, and the violence prevention folk have a hard time gaining their trust because they're basically getting interrogated by the cops in their bedside before the violence prevention folks even get to them. And when you have these massive budgets expanding over and over, when you have budget cuts like now, it just makes it hard for the violence prevention ecosystem to coexist with the policing. So we really have to make the argument that as much as Black people are desperate for anything, and they'll say, just give me anything. But what they want is jobs, mentoring, and many of them do want police. We have to explain to them that the narratives and scripts about deterrence that we've gotten from propaganda don't actually work. Like if I have people around me trying to shoot me who are in the community, I'm going to carry a gun no matter what the sentence is because I'd rather be caught with it than without it. Like if I need to use it, I need to have it on me. And the ramifications of dying are worse than going to jail. So we have to change the conditions in community that leads to people feeling they need to engage in the underground economy and they need to carry guns. But also, if they are in the community and doing things that are survival economics, we have to have appropriate punishment and not just sew you away for 10, 15 years for just carrying an illegal gun. When you can't get a legal one if you have a marijuana conviction that you can get in Baltimore for just being black and male and outside, right? So we have to really talk to people about the lies, about the deterrent scripts and the lies that people get services in jail to be able to counter not just occupation from the right, but also just proceduralist occupation from the left or the center.
As always, fascinating conversation. Appreciate you breaking this down, bringing interesting perspectives on. Lawrence Grandpre, Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, based in the great city of Baltimore. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.